In this video, I'll break down what's really inside your Chick-fil-A favorites, and why nutrition experts and even former employees say you should think twice before digging in. Chick-fil-A likes to sell itself as an American favorite, and on the surface, that story sounds warm and wholesome. A small diner in Atlanta, 1946, one man with a dream, then boom, it becomes the nation's biggest chicken chain. But here's the part most people skip. From day one, the Cathy family baked their faith and their rules into every bite of chicken. They weren't just running a business, they were running a belief system dressed up as fast food. The company still quotes its corporate purpose as to glorify God by being a faithful steward. And in 2000, the family even signed a covenant promising to stay private, never open on Sundays, and keep operations tied to committed Christian values. That kind of move sounds quaint at first. Who doesn't like the idea of family tradition? But the reality is more complicated. I still remember thinking as a kid that Chick-fil-A being closed on Sunday felt almost mysterious, like they were holier than every other drive-thru. As an adult, though, I see it as a business flex. They can afford to shut down a whole day because the other 6 are that profitable. And profitable is an understatement. By 2019, Chick-fil-A pulled in $10.5 billion in sales, making it the third largest U.S. restaurant chain, right behind McDonald's and Starbucks. That's not little southern diner numbers, that's global giant territory. The kicker? They're still family-owned. And if you've ever wondered why their stores feel packed every time you drive past, it's because they average the highest per-restaurant sales in all of fast food. That's why you can't get near one at lunchtime without seeing cars wrapped around the block. But here's where things start to turn. For all the family values branding, the company has a long history of controversy. In 2012, CEO Dan Cathy came out against same-sex marriage, not in a quiet memo publicly. And that wasn't a small ripple. It set off boycotts, nationwide protests, and a culture war that still shadows the brand. Imagine telling customers you treat every person with honor, dignity, and respect, while openly lobbying against their rights. That contradiction sticks, and it's one of those things people never forget once they've seen behind the curtain. Even their image of generosity, community donations, mentoring programs, scholarships has been a double-edged sword. Yes, the company gives money away. But some of those funds have gone to organizations openly fighting progressive causes. So while you might think you're just buying a chicken sandwich, part of your cash has historically fueled an agenda. It's one of those hidden layers that makes people stop mid-bite and wonder if their lunch lines up with their values. And don't think the polished ads and the eat more chicken cows erase this stuff. That campaign was clever, sure, but it also leaned hard on a folksy southern charm that distracts you from the tougher questions. Like why a chain that preaches doing what matters more than our business can still be accused of putting profits and politics above people. I'll be honest, every time I see one of their perfectly smiling cashiers, I can't help but wonder how much is genuine hospitality and how much is drilled into them by a company obsessed with its image. That's the tightrope Chick-fil-A walks. A brand rooted in nostalgia, Sundays off, friendly service, and chicken that just tastes better. But underneath, it's also a corporation that's drawn fire for mixing faith, food, and politics in ways that divide communities. Some people shrug and say, who cares? The chicken's good. Others can't separate the sandwich from the statement. Here's the thing. Nutrition experts and even some former employees will tell you to think twice before digging in. Not just because of calories or sodium, but because eating at Chick-fil-A isn't a neutral act. You're stepping into a culture war disguised as lunch. And once you've seen the bigger picture, it's hard to unsee it. What's in the sandwich is the part most people never pause to ask, and that's where things start getting messy. Chick-fil-A loves to frame it simple. A chicken breast. No fillers, no hormones, no steroids. Sounds clean, right? They were even one of the first major chains to brag about going no antibiotics ever back in 2019. It played perfectly into the idea that this was the healthier, more wholesome drive-thru option compared to greasy burger joints. But here's the rub. In 2024, they quietly stepped back. They switched to something called no antibiotics important to human medicine. In plain English, that means they'll still allow some antibiotics in their chickens, just not the ones doctors rely on for people. Health experts weren't impressed. One even warned this kind of backpedal sets a dangerous precedent. And they're right. Once a chain this size eases up, others feel free to follow. That's how you lose decades of progress fighting antibiotic resistance. And while the marketing screams fresh and clean, The nutrition labels tell a different story. A single classic sandwich is 440 calories with 18 grams of fat. Add waffle fries and a soda, and you're packing in more sodium and carbs than a double cheeseburger. I'll tell you from experience, after a combo like that, you don't feel energized, you feel weighed down. It's not just an occasional treat, it's a slow build toward hypertension, weight gain, and doctor visits you didn't plan on. Even food safety hasn't been bulletproof here. In 2018, Chick-fil-A's salads got swept up in that nationwide E. coli scare with romaine lettuce. Over 60 people sick, hospitalizations included. They yanked the salads fast, but it showed something important. Even a chain built on a trusted image can end up serving tainted greens. In 2022, one customer with a dairy allergy nearly died after eating grilled nuggets mislabeled by a supplier. In 2024, they had to recall sauce packets that weren't labeled for wheat or soy, mistakes that could literally put someone in the ER. These aren't small oops moments. They're the kind of slip-ups that make you think twice about who's really paying attention behind the counter. And then there's the conspiracy crowd. In 2023, viral posts claimed Chick-fil-A's sandwiches contained a poultry contraceptive drug called nicarbazin. The truth? Fact-checkers proved it was overblown. Trace amounts showed up in one activist test, nothing harmful. But the fact it spread so fast tells you something. People already don't fully trust what's in their food. And when your brand is built on no hormones, no fillers, no junk, even a whiff of doubt hits harder. Here's another kicker most people don't know. A deep dive in 2011 found close to 100 different ingredients inside what's sold as a simple chicken sandwich. Preservatives, additives, even compounds derived from petroleum. You don't see that list on the menu board, but it's there if you dig. So while the front-facing story is just chicken and pickles, the reality is a processed product engineered for consistency and shelf life. I still remember when fast food sandwiches tasted like, well, sandwiches, not like a science project wrapped in foil. The point is this: Chick-fil-A isn't immune to the very same health landmines you'd expect at any fast food joint. The calories are heavy, the recalls are real, and the purity image is shakier than the ads want you to believe. They've built a reputation on clean, family-friendly branding, but behind the smiling cashier and waffle fries, it's still corporate fast food playing the same game as everyone else. And if you thought their sandwiches were the better choice, nutritionists and former insiders would say, don't be fooled. It's comfort food, dressed in a Sunday suit. One bite might feel harmless, but the bigger picture looks a lot like every other greasy combo on the strip. And that's not something most people want to admit until they're staring at their blood pressure numbers and connecting the dots. Now let's talk about something Chick-fil-A doesn't advertise on billboards: animal welfare and sustainability. On paper, they paint a picture that feels almost pastoral. Cage-free barns, climate control, plenty of food and water, even an animal well-being council guiding suppliers. They promise 100% cage-free eggs by 2026, and for years they bragged about chicken raised without antibiotics. If you just skim the headlines, it sounds like the kind of place your conscience could eat at. But scratch below the surface, and you realize a lot of those promises are more marketing than movement. Take the cage-free pledge. McDonald's and other chains already hit 100% cage-free. But Chick-fil-A admitted in 2024 it might miss its 2026 goal. They blame bird flu and industry dynamics. Translation? They haven't moved the needle much, and independent groups rank them among the laggards. I've seen this game before. When companies know their customers care, they promise big and quietly stall later. The antibiotic story follows the same pattern. Chick-fil-A was loud about being the first major fast food chain to go, "No antibiotics ever." That's the kind of phrase people repeat to their friends. It makes you feel better about grabbing a combo. But in 2024, they walked it back. Now, it's no antibiotics important to human medicine, which means some drugs are still used in their chicken supply, just not the ones doctors need to treat humans. Food safety experts immediately flagged the danger. It normalizes slipping backward on a public health issue we've been fighting for decades. And don't think their environmental image is much sturdier. Yes, they brag about turning used cooking oil into biodiesel and diverting 59 million pounds of food waste from landfills. A couple of pilot stores even run on solar. Sounds shiny and modern, but then you look at the other side of the ledger. Chick-fil-A serves 2.1 billion customers a year, and with every one of those orders comes foam cups, plastic wrappers, and disposable packaging. Public Interest Research Group flat out called them a plastic polluter. warning that their continued use of wasteful packaging is adding to the global plastic crisis. The cup in your hand becomes a landfill problem the moment you toss it. I still remember when sodas came in waxy paper cups that at least broke down in a few weeks. Those days are long gone. Even their much-hyped composting programs can feel like a distraction when the bigger problem is untouched. Diverting scraps is nice, but it doesn't erase the mountains of single-use waste pouring out of 3,000 stores every single day. It's like bragging you cleaned the kitchen while the whole house is still on fire. The larger pattern here is hard to ignore. Whenever the supply chain gets tight or the cost of doing the right thing creeps up, Chick-fil-A softens the standards. Animal well-being gives way to convenience. Environmental pledges get delayed. Promises are wrapped in polished language, but the reality, crowded barns, half-met goals, endless plastic, isn't quite so photogenic. If you care about whether your food comes from ethical sources or if your dollars support companies reducing waste, Chick-fil-A's record isn't the feel-good story they like to tell. It's carefully worded stewardship that looks green and humane from the outside, but crumbles under real inspection. And once you've seen that gap, you can't unsee it. Then you realize the smiles at the counter hide something else entirely: labor and workplace reality. Chick-fil-A loves to sell the image of family, dignity, and respect, but step behind the fryer and you'll find a string of fines, lawsuits, and headlines that tell a different story. In 2022, one North Carolina franchise was caught employing 3 minors in hazardous roles, even paying one worker with meal vouchers instead of wages. Federal investigators slapped them with fines and forced back pay. A year later in Utah, another store illegally scheduled 14 and 15-year-olds for way too many hours, then played games with the time clock to avoid paying overtime. That stunt alone cost nearly $187,500 in penalties. This isn't some rare slip-up, it's part of a pattern. Florida, Georgia, Idaho, the list of cases keeps growing. When labor law becomes optional, kids end up in compactors, and adults end up cheated out of wages. And it's not just paychecks. In North Carolina, a Chick-fil-A went viral for posting on Facebook asking for volunteers to work in exchange for free chicken. Volunteers at a for-profit fast food joint. The backlash was immediate, but the fact that a franchise even thought it was worth a try says a lot about the culture. I've lived long enough to know one thing: when a business starts offering food instead of money, workers are the ones going hungry. The problems don't stop with wages. Discrimination lawsuits have surfaced too, peeling back that "we're all family here" promise. A transgender woman in Georgia sued after being misgendered and harassed at work. Management did little until the courts got involved. In Idaho, a black employee said his boss retaliated against him for speaking out, humiliating him, until he finally stood up and recorded the abuse. These aren't isolated stories. They point to a system where prejudice is tolerated as long as the cash registers keep ringing. Now, to be fair, Chick-fil-A is known for some positives: scholarships for employees, leadership training, even topping best place to work lists in the quick service world. Plenty of workers will tell you they've had good experiences, and some stick around for years. But that's the paradox. The feel-good stories sit right next to reports of unpaid overtime, intimidation, and harassment. Which version you get seems to depend less on the brand's values and more on the whims of whichever franchisee runs your local store. And that's the catch with Chick-fil-A's business model. Corporate gets the glory, while individual operators hold the power. When those operators bend the rules, whether it's underpaying workers, exploiting teenagers, or looking the other way on discrimination, the brand's wholesome image does the heavy lifting to distract the public. Meanwhile, the workers inside are left dealing with the consequences. So while the company smiles about Southern hospitality, some of its restaurants are breaking child labor laws, silencing workers, and settling harassment lawsuits. Once you know that, every waffle fry tastes just a little different. And if you dig deeper into Chick-fil-A's story, you bump straight into its other big shadow: culture wars and corporate giving. For years, this wasn't just a chicken sandwich brand. It was a lightning rod. Back in the late 2000s and 2010s, Chick-fil-A quietly sent millions to groups like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and the Salvation Army, charities criticized for opposing same-sex marriage. Then, in 2012, CEO Dan Cathy didn't just keep it quiet. He doubled down, saying he supported the biblical definition of family. That one phrase set off boycotts, counter-boycotts, and even city councils rethinking whether they wanted the chain moving in. The backlash got so big that by 2019, Chick-fil-A's own foundation had to backpedal, announcing it would stop long-term funding to those charities and focus instead on hunger, homelessness, and education. They made sure to tell reporters they had fulfilled earlier commitments and were pivoting. LGBT groups cautiously nodded, but many people noticed the timing. It only came after years of protest and bad press. And even then, local franchise donations kept popping up, little $25,000 grants here and there under the vague banner of community causes. I remember thinking at the time, it felt less like a moral awakening and more like someone changing the locks after the neighborhood already saw inside. But the fire never completely went out. In 2021, reports surfaced that Dan Cathy himself had quietly donated again to a foundation tied to anti-LGBTQ positions, despite the company's public promise to stop. To critics, it looked like the same playbook all over again. Say one thing for the cameras, do another in private. Families were left asking the uncomfortable question, is my lunch money being recycled into a cause I'd never sign my name to? This controversy has shaped the company's expansion too. When Chick-fil-A tried opening in London and Reading back in 2019, boycotts shut the doors almost as quickly as they opened. Now they're trying again in Britain, dangling charity checks of £25,000 per store to local nonprofits as a kind of peace offering. But the UK press didn't miss the irony. Dan Cathy's past words about marriage equality are still printed right next to the announcement. You don't erase a decade of headlines with a few novelty-sized donation checks. And here at home, the saga got so tangled, it even turned into law. Texas literally passed a Save Chick-fil-A bill in 2019, designed to stop cities or airports from blocking businesses based on the owner's beliefs or donations. Imagine that. Fast food legislation born out of one chain's political baggage. That's how deep the chicken wars went. The company's defenders point out that Chick-fil-A today isn't funneling the same millions into those old culture war charities. And maybe that's true in practice, but the leadership's personal views and the history of those donations left a permanent mark on the brand. When a CEO says your family doesn't count, that doesn't just fade from memory. For plenty of parents and grandparents, eating there feels less like grabbing lunch and more like casting a vote, whether they mean to or not. What this really shows is how slippery the company's values can be. One year, they're entrenched in the fight against marriage equality. The next, they're posing with ribbon-cutting ceremonies for food banks. Which version of Chick-fil-A is the real one? The one smiling at the camera? Or the one writing quiet checks behind the curtain? That's the question customers are left holding, tray in hand. And once you see that contradiction, it's hard not to feel like every spicy chicken sandwich comes with a side of politics you didn't order. But here's the part that rattles people even more: food safety. For a chain built on that squeaky clean, family-friendly image, Chick-fil-A has had its share of messy recalls and contamination scares. The one that still sticks with me is the 2018 romaine lettuce outbreak. It wasn't just some bad bag of greens, it turned into a multi-state E. coli crisis. 62 people got sick, 25 were hospitalized, and a handful ended up with kidney complications. One California customer said a simple Southwest salad landed them in a hospital bed for a week. Think about that. You go for what's supposed to be the lighter option, and suddenly you're dealing with IV fluids instead of waffle fries? Now, was it Chick-fil-A's direct fault? No, the contamination came from their suppliers. But that's the point. When a chain this big relies on nationwide produce shipments, one bad lot can hit thousands of plates in a heartbeat. A salad feels safer, fresher, even virtuous compared to fried chicken. But when romaine lettuce becomes a Trojan horse for E. coli, it shatters the illusion. I've been through my own food poisoning once, and trust me, it makes you rethink every healthy choice in a fast food bag. Then there's the allergen recalls. In 2022, Chick-fil-A had to issue warnings because grilled nuggets were mislabeled and contained dairy. That's not just an inconvenience, it's a potential death sentence for someone with a severe milk allergy. Same thing in 2016 with their chocolate chunk cookies. They were advertised as nut-free, yet suppliers flagged possible peanut cross contact. Imagine giving your kid one of those cookies thinking it's safe, and ending up rushing to the ER with an EpiPen. That kind of mistake erodes trust fast, and it hasn't stopped. Just last year, 2024, they had to recall Polynesian sauce packets because the labeling was wrong. Customers with soy or wheat allergies thought they were in the clear. only to find out the sauce actually contained spicy ingredients that could trigger reactions. To their credit, Chick-fil-A publicized the recall, but you know what that really means? Even their most iconic items can slip through the cracks. It's a reminder that the system isn't bulletproof, no matter how polished the marketing is. What really stirs the pot are the viral rumors. In late 2023, a wave of social media posts claimed Chick-fil-A sandwiches contained bird contraceptives. Sounds ridiculous, right? And Snopes debunked it, pointing out only one activist test ever found trace amounts of a chemical called nicarbazin, with no proof of any industry-wide practice. But here's the thing. People believed it. They shared it. They worried about it. Because when you've already seen real recalls, a wild rumor doesn't feel completely impossible. It taps right into that creeping doubt. What else are they not telling us? For anyone with food sensitivities, allergies, or weaker immune systems, those doubts hit even harder. Seniors, parents, folks recovering from illness, they can't just roll the dice on mislabeled nuggets or contaminated lettuce. And while Chick-fil-A usually responds quickly and responsibly when something goes wrong, the fact that these incidents keep happening shows the cracks in the armor. It's not just a Chick-fil-A problem. It's a fast food supply chain problem. But Chick-fil-A sells itself as the exception, the place where you can trust the chicken, trust the service, trust the brand. When the recalls start stacking up, that promise feels thinner. I'll be honest. I still catch myself craving those waffle fries once in a while, but then I think about how fragile the whole system is. One misstep from a supplier, one misprint on a label, and suddenly the safer choice is the one that takes you down. That thought alone makes the drive-thru line look a lot less appetizing. Chick-fil-A has managed to build an empire off chicken sandwiches and waffle fries, but its reputation today feels less like a clean win and more like a constant balancing act. On one hand, the chain has undeniably grown. Its menu isn't just fried chicken anymore. You've got grilled options, kale salads, breakfast biscuits, and the much-hyped spicy variations. They're testing drive-thru systems with tech that tracks orders faster than most sit-down restaurants can bring you a menu. Expansion into tough markets like California and New York shows the chain isn't afraid of competition. And yes, it's true, many franchises donate unused food to shelters or community programs. If you judge by speed, cleanliness, and customer service scores, Chick-fil-A often beats its rivals. But the clean, wholesome image only works if you ignore the other side of the story, and that's where the cracks begin to show. Even as it opened its arms to new markets, activists and bloggers kept digging. By late 2024, new revelations popped up about hidden plastics and chemicals in menu items, details that never make the glossy billboards. Food safety recalls, allergen mislabels, and contamination scares don't always lead to headlines, but they chip away at the idea of Chick-fil-A being different from other fast food. The longer you look, the more you see that the chain faces the same supply chain vulnerabilities, the same labeling slip-ups, the same risks as the brands it claims to rise above. And then there's philanthropy. Sure, Chick-fil-A has shifted donations toward hunger relief, homelessness, and education. They promote those initiatives heavily. But people haven't forgotten the years of high-profile contributions to organizations fighting against LGBTQ+ rights. Even though the company officially stopped funneling millions into those groups, Dan Cathy himself was later revealed to be giving privately to causes with similar agendas. It leaves consumers with a nagging thought. Is this genuine change or just damage control? The tension doesn't end there. On labor, the brand has drawn criticism for wage disputes and worker treatment, especially as it expands. For years, Chick-fil-A thrived on a reputation for treating employees better than other chains, offering scholarships and Sunday rest. Yet complaints about scheduling practices, lack of upward mobility, and inconsistent pay undermine that rosy narrative. Customers who once trusted the chain as the family values restaurant now face stories that sound a lot like the rest of the fast food world: workers stretched thin, corporate profits soaring, and values that shift depending on public pressure. Environmental concerns also weigh in. Chicken may not have the same carbon footprint as beef, but the scale of Chick-fil-A's operations is massive. Activists point to supply chains riddled with antibiotic use, intensive farming, and waste-heavy packaging. For a brand that markets itself with smiling cows telling you to eat more chicken, the environmental irony doesn't go unnoticed. When I drive past a packed Chick-fil-A and see the trash bins overflowing with plastic cups and bags, it feels less like a family restaurant and more like a factory line feeding into the landfill. The tricky part for consumers is that both stories are true. You can walk into a Chick-fil-A and get fast service, polite staff, a relatively consistent meal, and feel like you supported a company that donates to local shelters. Or you can take the wider view and see the recalls, the labor issues, the controversial giving history, the environmental strain, and the constant PR spin. The sandwich doesn't change, but the meaning behind buying it might. That's why Chick-fil-A feels so polarizing right now. For some, it's a guilty pleasure they'll defend to the grave. For others, it's become a line in the sand. What you eat signals what you stand for. And unlike the days when fast food was just about convenience, today's customer is weighing more than calories and price. They're weighing values. So the next time someone brags about Chick-fil-A being the good one, remember that the brand's reputation isn't spotless, it's layered with contradiction. Every bite of chicken carries not just flavor, but baggage, politics, recalls, cultural fights, environmental costs. And the uncomfortable truth? Once you see the full picture, it's not just about whether you like the sandwich, it's about whether you can still swallow the story that comes with it. Would you? Or does that last waffle fry suddenly taste a little different?